Welcome to the Saturnalia Chateau. Couldn't be more excited to be talking to Jose Reyes, who is the Chief Creative Officer at EY, a good friend and someone who has been to some Cannes in his life. And we were talking in anticipation of this conversation. Like, is there an equation around Cannes? What is Cannes? What does this festival of creativity, this award show where creativity is celebrated, and what is there a way to sort of distill this? And could there be something fun to talk about around that? And I forget the exact. There's something akin to. I'll check. Is something like buzzword of the year plus a celebration of creativity. Over
craft.
With a business outcome, and almost all those things are consistent, with one exception: the buzzword. Right, the buzzword of the year. And so we thought it might be a fun way to start. And the goal of this Cocktails and Conversations is to spur ongoing conversation over a drink throughout the evening. So
it's the conversation part.
Yeah, this is like the conversation. Right. We want to come. So we thought it might be fun to look at the ghost of buzzwords past. Spitball. Let Jose, who is a brilliant creative, a great expert, has seen some of these out. So how this has played out. And then discuss the buzzword of this year, which I'm sure none of you can imagine what it is, and ask ourselves, why is this night different from all other nights? Is this buzzword any different than the ones from years gone by? So that is how we're starting this off. So we're going to start here. Anything you want to add before we jump right into this?
No, that's awesome. That's awesome.
Let's hit this.
Yeah,
let's hit this. Does anyone remember a little thing called the Metaverse? the Metaverse. Yeah, the what?
That's amazing.
Does anyone remember the Metaverse? It was a long time ago when this was the buzzword at Cannes last year.
Yeah.
But Jose,
it's like doing something bad in high school and not wanting to remember it ever again.
Right.
That's what happens.
So Metaverse. Speaking about where do we remember the Metaverse at all? You wrote to me, it's like a tracksuit, cool for the moment, but maybe hasn't aged well.
It is. Is there anything a little bit like a tracksuit? And I think at some point it will come around.
Yeah. All right. So that's what I'm curious about. What are the real? Now that it's shaken out, it is not the buzzword of Cannes this year. No. So how has it shaken out in reality when it's no longer performative engagement with the concept? It's actually. There has to be something real. What is real in Metaverse?
I mean, maybe opinion of one, right?
Yeah. You're the only one on stage with me, so that's
the Metaverse. the Metaverse was a really interesting social experiment.
Yeah.
And so companies started to use that as a way to instigate experimentation. So there was absolutely a value to it.
Yeah.
I think that the value quickly waned and attention turned to something else very quickly because there was an easy association between we're going to experiment this shit over here and all of a sudden there's a corollary. We could do that
with this
and we can connect it to this.
All right. So it's almost an evolution in a way. The Metaverse evolved a little.
I think so.
Very cool. All right. I have another one for you. Does anyone remember the age of big data? Big data, which again you have here, has it matured like the skinny suit?
It's like a skinny suit. It's totally like a skinny suit. At some point the skinny suit was cool and maybe for 10 years it was okay and you wore a skinny tie and then all of a sudden you showed up to the party and you were like, no, nobody has a skinny suit. And it's a little bit too tight on you and it's not quite right. And all of a sudden you just haven't aged into it.
Yeah. So that's it's a very interesting idea. Big data, clearly there is, big data has not gone away. It's just kind of the performance range. So what do we have left when it is no longer theatrical? What would you say if you were to ask CMOs today about this thing? How has it impacted sort of the job to be done for a modern CMO?
Well, what I think evolved is not the data piece, but what do we do with this piece?
Right. Finding the signal and the noise, the story.
The data, the idea of big data, I think is still there, but the ability to actually extract things from the data has matured with whatever the recent buzzword is that we're going to get to eventually. But I think that sometimes you have something that's in the zeitgeist that captures everybody's attention, but you need the rest of it to mature and catch up to it.
Yep.
And I think that's what's happening with big data.
All right. So here's another one that was so courant once. We were hearing about it at every talk. Purpose.
Purpose brand, purpose-led brand,
Yep.
purpose advertising, purpose. It's like the word strategy.
That's funny.
Okay.
Yeah. And any implications today? Like, has it evolved? I mean, does it remain relevant? I mean, certainly, if you ask one of our previous speakers, I won't mention who, today, they would say that purpose-driven marketing, the data always told you it was going to be nothing but a performative buzzword. Do you feel like has it found its actual application?
Yes.
Or is it just in the graveyard?
Yeah,
you know?
I mean, maybe it hasn't aged well from the original concept, but I think it has definitely matured. I think when I talked, I have 3 kids at home.
Yeah.
And when I speak to them about the things that they're interested in, they just don't call it purpose, but they lead with the definition.
Oh, I love that.
That we would have called purpose back in the day. So I think it's still there. It's just, we had to attach a word to it so that we could put it on a billboard and put it on stage and do all kinds of things with it. But the idea of it is still absolutely there.
Well, it's funny. I was at a very interesting workshop at Bloomberg yesterday, and we were talking about you were with me, right? About honesty, right, in marketing. And there was this insight along the way, like, is this so important? And I think the insight was the moment you are coming out and claiming that you're about honesty or authenticity, you are implicitly seem dishonest and inauthentic. Whereas if you're in fact just being honest about something that is application to the customer's experience, then that's kind of where the value is. Maybe that's kind of like.
I mean, I would suspect that as a CMO, the moment that you start advertising it, not advertising like TV advertising, but the moment that you actually start calling it out, you're putting a spotlight on it, and therefore inviting, a bunch of the zeitgeist to come at you.
Right.
So I think it's interesting. I think you still have to maintain a certain level of authenticity and purpose as a brand, because otherwise you don't connect with the audiences that you want to connect with.
Yeah.
From a business strategy perspective.
So it is interesting when I look back, when just thinking about how you've articulated these other kind of moments in which every panel sort of had this interwoven within it in any given year. It sounds to me, and as I play this back in my mind, that what you see are not really, like we can joke about the metaverse because there was so much about it just so recently, but like that it's not really these things fall off, that these things are implicitly wrong. It's that they evolve into the broader marketing ecosystem as simply a piece of a broad practice.
Right. That's right. I think that's right.
Which leads us to, what would you say is the buzzword of 2024?
So 2023, it came with a vengeance.
Yeah.
I mean, you couldn't order a cup of coffee without saying, like, can I have a generative AI coffee?
Right.
Like it came with a vengeance.
And the coffee was better and you could get one.
Yeah, it was more efficient and the whole 9 yards, right? What's been interesting, at least in a day and a half, 2 days, is I have found it to be a little bit more balanced. It isn't the fervor of generative AI. It's present in the conversation, but in the context of using it in a combination with the data that you have.
Yeah.
And using it in combination with how do you portray your purpose, and using it in conversation with other things. So for me, at least, it goes past like what we all witnessed last year, which was like, the terror, And this year...
Yeah, I remember last year literally hearing people talking about like what will the job count be like in 12 months? Like what's going to be a marketing department's... What's the expected attrition averaging? It was like something like 70% gone. Some people were like, I'm going to be really conservative, just 25 to 30% of your average market will be gone in a year.
And probably like anything else, right? You take one of these cold water plunges,
Yeah.
and you're in the plunge for 1 second, and it feels like, ice water.
Yeah.
And after a minute, you're like, hey, this isn't so bad.
Yeah.
I think we're seeing a bit of the same thing, right? Generative AI last year was I jumped into the freezing cold ice water. And this year it's, okay, it's not so bad.
Yeah.
We've learned how to apply it. We've learned what use cases are appropriate. We've learned what it can and can't do in some cases. I think we're still learning. But it's really interesting that we are starting to see applications of it that are, dare I say, a little bit more pragmatic.
Mm-hmm.
I do think it's here to stay.
Yeah.
I think it's here to stay. And I think it's here to stay in a way that will inevitably allow us as humans to do pretty amazing things.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe because I'm an optimist, I don't necessarily think it's going to overtake us.
Yeah.
It is going to enable us to do things that we haven't been able to do before because we get tired, because we have to sleep at night, because when you're reading a legal document that's 567 pages long,
right.
Your eyes go, cross-eyed. I think that those things are going to be enabled by technologies that we then interact with.
So I'll end. This is a last question. Then we can see if there's any questions.
We go like this.
We can waggle. But if you had to think as a master practitioner of creativity for your brand partners, are there any applications of creativity that you would call out that right now you feel have added value to your team's practice at EY or to your own personal practice, or things that you've seen? What's the one thing that you would call out, if there is one?
Value of using the human or value of using...
Of the AI.
Right. So now we're going to get super crazy. So for me, there's three channels, right? There's creativity for AI, in which case you've got designers that are learning to interact. Their end customer is actually the generative AI, which they need to learn how to pitch to, work with, give instruction to. It's sort of classic creative direction, right? Creative director had a human equivalent of a generative AI studio, and they would give creative direction. You can't hit the go button on the generative AI without giving it creative direction. It doesn't know what direction to take.
Right.
So there's a design for.
Yep.
Then there's a design by, in which case I think we're going to see things that were traditionally done by human bandwidth, right? I'm going to work 47 hours doing this one tool, this one thing. And I think that generative AI, in that case, will help us.
Yeah.
It will relieve, right? And then I think we have for, by, and then I think the third one is with, which then I think is the really interesting one. Because then I get to co-create with a tool. I studied art in school, literally painting.
Yeah.
So when you create a painting and you use a brush, you get a completely different experience than when you use a palette knife, which is a hard edge tool. One is soft, one is hard. So you're picking your tools, right? Generative AI is no different. If I'm designing with a generative AI tool, a brush, then I can pick what kind of experience, and I'm designing with it, and I'm being inspired by it, and I'm asking it to create 100 versions of the thought that I had, because I'm not fast enough to go through all of those variations, and I want to test those things out. It's a little bit, superhero movie-ish about like, I want to run all the time possibilities at the same time, and I want to pick the one that's going to win. In those cases, there's still, I believe, going to be the necessity to feel the expression of the human in the work, because at the end of the day, I am not going to trust the mechanism. I'm going to trust that Scott
Yep.
gave me his perception of his experience vis-a-vis this
tool
thing. But I want to believe that there's a human on the other side of it that had an experience similar to mine.
Right.
Because otherwise, there's no value for me.
We've left the building.
We've left the building. Elvis has left. Yeah.
All right. All right. Well, that's good. Well, so I'm going to first say a round of applause for Jose. Thank you for this.